Good morning, everybody. Thank you all for taking the time to attend today's session. A little bit of housekeeping just before we start. So today's session shouldn't take more than 30 minutes, including questions. In the chat pod, you can ask questions throughout, and there is some dedicated time at the end to ask as well. Just be aware when you're asking a question or typing, just need to tick the box that states you're asking a question as well. But otherwise, I will kick off. So let's. There we go. Okay. Hopefully everybody can see my slide, my intro slide on Adobe Sign. So thank you very much for joining today. This is a session on digital signatures, very specifically for Adobe Sign, although the contents will be applicable for many solutions. And the focus for today is really for charity customers and non-profits, although again, a lot of the content and use cases for digital signatures are applicable across multiple verticals. So this will be applicable for many people. Agenda-wise today, we'll start off with brief introductions. We'll touch on what Adobe Sign is before we delve into the benefits of using Sign, and we'll look at some specific use cases. I will touch on licensing, but again, it's probably where it gets a bit more complicated, and feel free to lean on us post this webinar. I will touch on the support that's available before we summarize and have time for questions as well. So introductions, my name is David Grant. I am the Software Solutions Manager here at Academia. I am responsible for managing Adobe, and I've been with the company for over 11 years, including approximately about a 2-year stint managing our Charities and Non-Profits team, which does feel like many moons ago now. We are Adobe's largest educational reseller in the UK, and the reason that's applicable for today is that charities and non-profits generally procure as educational licenses, which can make a huge saving. We are one of 9 platinum partners in the UK, which is the highest level of accreditation you can obtain, and therefore we have access to the best pricing. And similarly, we're only one of 4 education elite partners in the UK, which again gives us additional resource and insight into Adobe. So what is Adobe Sign? I've plagiarized a slide from Adobe, which gives a very in-depth description, but the bold statement at the end, I think, gives a good summary in that it's a cloud-based service to enable legal e-signatures, and it's part of Document Cloud. Before I move on to the next slide, the point I want to sort of raise here is we've seen a lot in the last few years, and particularly with COVID, in a move towards digital transformation as we try to move things to the cloud to make applications and services available to our staff and stakeholders wherever they may be. And a lot of these digital transformation projects are very expensive, very time consuming. It can be hard to really recognize the benefits. And for me, a digital signature transition is probably one of the best examples of a quick win in the world of digital transformation, where you're able to migrate from a manual-based process to a digital one in a fairly quick time frame and being able to see those benefits very quickly, which is definitely something worth bearing in mind with everything going on. So what are the benefits of using Sign and for who? And before I go into some other specific examples, I'm going to give you my example of why I moved to a digital signature solution, and the justification why. And my use case is very basic in that it's very much just me sending contracts to somebody else or signing contracts. I only have to do 2 or 3 a week. And it's not, the biggest part of my day job. So think about this example and think about it in your organization in terms of the amount of processes you may be doing, and you start scaling up the benefits that I had for your organizations. So my old process was painstaking in that I'd get these 45-page base contracts that we sell via a particular framework agreement. And for me to sign them, I'd have to print all 45 pages, and they could sometimes be as big as 300. I'd print it. I wouldn't stand at the printer and wait, so I'd probably leave the job to finish before I wander over a few minutes later. I'd then get up, go to the printer. I would get my contract. I'd sign that one page that needs signing, and I'd scan it back into the scanner to my email. I would then throw that paper away after its very short-lived life. And painfully, I'm going back quite a few years, one of our old scanners had a limitation on 15 pages per email. So my 45-page document would be emailed through as 3 separate attachments that I then had to stitch painfully together. But lo and behold, I was then ready to send my signed contract off, and touch wood and praying that would not get There wouldn't any queries which would require me going back through that whole process again. So the negatives are probably quite evident, but just to highlight some of them for you, the first one was the waste of paper and related materials such as transport. And this was really my catalyst in migrating. I was conscious that the paper that has spent all this time being produced, manufactured, delivered, sitting in that printer just to be used for the best part of a minute, if it was even used at all. And I established I was probably using about 2/3 of a tree a year myself. And it seemed like a horrendous waste, which really prompted me to look for an alternative solution. Another negative was that I left my document on the printer, and this may not be applicable to all, but if you're in finance or HR and you have printers that are available on open floor plans, for example, you might have sensitive data. You do not want to be leaving sensitive data at a printer. An obvious one was the time lost in the process. So my old process probably took around 20 minutes from me printing to send. And with the digital signature solution, it's the best part of 2 minutes. And that's probably in a more complex scenario. And again, that time saving can equate to me reusing that time. And what do they say? Time is money, apparently. So that could help me save money and potentially bring in additional money as well. Is it even evidence I signed? My signature has a habit of evolving per signature. So really the evidence that the recipient has that it's my signature is more in the sense that it's come from my email address as opposed to it's my signature on the document. And fundamentally, the entire process was inefficient and insecure. And again, think about this from your organization's perspective. This is a really basic example that saved me a lot of time and expense. And that could be very applicable to you for paper-based processes, which leads me nicely onto this slide, which talks about sort of the 5 main use cases. And what I've just been discussing is very much the first one. And I was probably a bit naive in fairness with digital signatures initially, in the sense that I felt it was only really utilized to sign. If you don't use a pen, use a digital signature instead. And that's absolutely applicable. So signing is still probably the main use case, and is still where a lot of you will see benefits with sales contracts, loans, NDAs, etc. But there are other use cases as well. You may just need people to fill in the form. And if you think about maybe a web-based form that might be asking for sponsorship or donation, you can integrate payment into online forms which capture information. You may only need to approve or accept something as part of a document. It might be part of a workflow where it's a purchase order and finance just need to approve or accept that. And again, can be utilized via a digital signature solution. If you're in a heavily regulated industry, if maybe you're doing work with a government organization, or again, you're in a more sensitive part of the business, such as finance or HR, you may need an audit trail to show how that document's evolved, who's created it, edited it, who signed it, and it has evidence of that throughout that stands up in court. So we'll look at how the solutions help in terms of sort of common customer pains. And again, the first one really is in line with my example, a manual paper-based process that was inefficient and time-consuming. Adobe have worked with Forrester, who have built some interesting reports with some stats, and they suggest you can make workers 30% more productive by automating signing approvals. So again, we'll use my example. I was saving 90% of time in comparison to my old process. If I had to do 20 contracts a week as opposed to 2, I could be saving a day a week of my life. And making it probably more satisfying as well, in the sense that I have less paper-based admin to go through. Another common one that really touches on the digital transformation point I alluded to right at the beginning, in that technologies don't translate into improved business results. And Adobe Sign positively impacts the user experience whilst improving your internal processes at the same time. As simple as it sounds, but speeding up that signature process. So how many processes are there in your organization that require a signature or approval to move it forwards? This allows business to continue. This allows things to happen faster just by decreasing the time to sign. Cost savings, again, in regards to that Forrester report, which was an American Forrester report, hence the USD figure, but they've estimated companies can save $11, which in our money is around £8 per signing transaction. And again, think about how many transactions are your organization doing, and then multiply by that figure. That is a return on investment that factors in the cost of the license itself. And then revenue and CRM, so shorten the sales cycle. This might be shortening the process to obtain funds, to get approvals through, so on and so forth. As I said right at the beginning, is whilst this is applicable for charities and non-profits, a lot of these use cases are applicable to many organisations. And here are just a few examples of use cases we're seeing. And they span multiple areas of the business, and are used to both enhance customer engagement and speed business processes. Your workforce is probably increasingly mobile, particularly with COVID now, but many common document workflows require a printer or a fax machine, amazingly, or maybe somebody in the office to complete that task. With Adobe Sign, you can bridge those gaps in common use cases like NDAs or contracts, campaign approvals, change requests, or finance agreements, for example. So by digitizing documents, you can eliminate unneeded steps. We'll look at one specific one on here. We'll look at HR, and we'll look at sort of managing the life cycle of employees. And often that begins with an offer letter, but it also includes things like benefits agreements, NDAs, policy updates, promotions, transitions to new jobs, for example. So throughout the employee life cycle, the experience should be seamless and a document should be secure. Adobe Sign is a great way for you to be able to achieve that. We'll look at some very specific examples here. So these are commercial, but again, the example applies to any industry. And the first one is Telefonica, a household name. And it was taking them 3 weeks to complete employee contracts. And by migrating to a digital process, they've got that down to 11 hours. So 92% time saving on that process. Thinking about how many employees you have and other use cases that relate, that is a huge saving. And actually would enhance the employee experience as well as HR by speeding up that entire process as well. Some extent, somewhat similar, but LeasePlan, a car leasing company, it would take 23.5 days to get contracts signed for leases because of the due diligence and paperwork required. And again, by automating that process and digitizing it, they've got that down to 4 days. So for LeasePlan, they're able to convert sales quicker. They're able to bring revenue into their organization faster, whilst continuing to deliver a better end user experience and reduce their reliance on in-house staff and resources as well. And the final one here is KLM, so the Royal Dutch Airlines, and from an industry that are certainly not well known for sustainability, KLM changed one single process with regards to their travel rewards, and that reduced their paper by 1 million sheets a year. And again, that is a really simple example, but something that any organisation can benefit from. There is a video of Global Fund, who are a UK-based charity, which we'll share out after this presentation as well. And it's a 2-minute video. I recommend having a look, and it's really an in-depth discussion as to how they've made some significant savings and benefits, and fundamentally are able to get on with their jobs and make things happen faster. So I don't know if this is the fun or the boring bit, depending on your perspective, I suppose, but we'll touch on how the product is licensed, which I think is important to understand. And this slide shows the types of, or the flavors of the solution that are available. And then the rows give us a bit more around the features and details per specific one. So both individual and small business are only available from adobe.com. I'd encourage you to reach out to your reseller, such as us, in terms of getting business or enterprise, which we can actually sell at the same prices. But we'll just quickly look at the features. So the very basic individual license gives you the ability to fill, sign. You can scan on mobile devices, and all versions have basic functionality, at least for Office 365 integration. If, for example, you're having contracts coming straight out of Word or items like that. And all of these features are available in small business, which then goes on to include some additional functionality like 2-factor authentication for advanced security. Probably a good one actually is payments. So you might have online forms which also require payments to be made. And Mega Sign, which is a really good feature that allows you to send things in bulk. So you may want to communicate to 300 staff in one go with the same template contract, but personalized to each member. This saves you having to create 300 separate documents, send them out and manage them all separately. So huge efficiency and savings for Mega Sign. Then when we go on to business and enterprise, or business specifically, the main advantages here are additional security. Knowledge-based authentication is only available in the US for now, but is coming soon. and phone authentication is available now. So that may be in a scenario where you've got a very sensitive document, and before that person can open and view the contract, they may get a one-time password on their mobile phone, for example. When we get to enterprise, there's two main things that I really focus on here that differentiate it from business and the preceding versions. The first one's really around integrations and APIs. So I've mentioned Office 365 integration, which is available in all preceding versions. But if you need us to integrate with Salesforce or a CRM system or a bespoke finance or HR system, you'll need the integrations or APIs that are available. There's around 70 off-the-shelf APIs. In addition, if you've got more complex workflows which require multiple signatures or lots of them, you might want to start automating those with workflow templates and designer. And the way this works is you can drag and drop people's roles and teams. And to give you an example, if you need to raise a purchase order, which may need a department head to sign, that then goes to finance for approval and then to procurement for final signature, and to raise a PO, you can drag and drop people's roles into the workflow template. And that allows you to automate the process. So once that first person hits go, you can automate the chasing of the next person of recipients so that somebody centrally through a dashboard can just see the status of where everything is and doesn't have to worry about chasing individuals to get things through. Then when we look at some of the other points as we go across the rows, there are no minimum seats for business or enterprise. So again, we can supply one if that's only needed. We sell them via what's called a VIP agreement. So anybody that buys Creative Cloud licenses now will probably procure that via a VIP agreement. And that's an annual agreement at pro rates. Licensing can be from as little as £2 a transaction for business edition and from as little as £3 a license for transactions. I'll touch on the named user licensing on the next slide, actually. So we'll touch on the difference between a named user license and a transaction. Now, your two options when you're looking to license. So you need to pick your version. Do I need business or do I need enterprise? And then to determine whether it's named users or transactions. And hopefully this next slide will either help you with that or raise more questions, in which case our team will be more than happy to support you on afterwards. So a named user license includes 150 transactions. It's worth defining what a transaction is at this stage. So a transaction is if I was to send one contract to one of our customers for somebody to sign, that counts as one contract. If it was still one document that 10 people had to sign, that's still one transaction, or they can also be consumables. If I had to send 5 contracts to 5 different people, that again is 5 transactions in its simplest form. So a single named user license will have 150 transactions, or if you go down the consumable/transaction model, you just pick how many transactions you need over that period. Worth noting, named user licenses do pool. So if you had 2 named users, each with 150 transactions, you'd have 300 transactions in total. And if one was super keen, they could use all 300 without anybody else being able to use them. It's something to be wary of to ensure you manage your licenses. And generally, I encourage customers to go down the transaction route, but it is a case-by-case scenario. So we'll look at some specific elements of this. So we'll look at co-terming. A VIP agreement will have a 12-month date, and as standard, they co-term now. So for the purpose of this slide, we're going to use the same example of a VIP agreement which started on the 1st of January 2020. So if I wanted to add a named user license or actually a transaction at any point throughout that agreement, it will expire on the 31st of December 2020 and you get 30 days grace. So the license will always expire in line with your VIP agreement, which means you're only going to have one agreement to manage. You don't have multiple expiry dates. Fairly simple point. Proration is where it starts to get a bit more complicated. So under a VIP agreement, you have the ability to prorate. So again, let's say a named user, one named user, if we just say it's £300, if you bought that on the 1st of January 2020, at the beginning of your contract, you would pay £300. Come the 1st of July, 6 months into your contract, you would pay £150. So the price halves because it prorates. You still get the same 150 named user, 150 transactions. And again, they will all still expire December 31st with an additional 30 days grace. With transactions, there is no proration. So if you bought 1,000 transactions on the 1st of January, in fact, you bought, let's use the same example, you bought 150 transactions on the 1st of January for £300. If you bought another 150 on the any time throughout the contract on the 31st of December with 1 day to go, the price is still exactly the same and those licenses will expire at the end of the term. So there is no proration available for transactions. When we look at volume discounts, named users fall in line with the current Creative Cloud and VIP licensing. So if, again, you have an existing VIP agreement or Creative Cloud or annual Acrobat licenses, for example, you can add them in exactly the same manner. And those agreements tend to be tiered on levels 1, 2, 3, and 4. The more you buy, the higher your tiering and the lower your unit cost. So if, for example, you had 100 Creative Cloud licenses, which automatically gives you access to level 4, which is 100 licenses plus, you could buy one named user license and you're buying that at that level 4 price. So it ties in with what your agreement states and the level your agreement is at. With transactions, it is not the case. I've included a little table at the bottom that gives you the tiering of transactions. So again, you can see 1 to 999, and let's say on the 1st of January, you bought 1,000 transactions. And that will be at a slight discount because you're on tier 2, so you're buying at a slight discount compared to tier 1 as the unit cost. But halfway through the agreement, you've used all of your 1,000 transactions and you think you only need another 500. Those 500 will be at a higher unit cost because you're now buying in tier 1. Adobe do not look back at your previous purchases and they do not look at any other licenses on that agreement to determine that price. So the point here is you want to try and really nail your transaction number as close as possible to, one, ensure you use them all at the end of the expiry date, and 2, that you're not having to procure more at a later date, which may have a higher unit cost. License management is fairly straightforward. So named users sit in the console as they would with any other Creative Cloud license. A benefit of a transaction is the administrator is flagged when you get to 80, 90%, and 100% of utilization. So I'm conscious that it's not as straightforward from a licensing perspective, but like I said, we have a dedicated charities team. You will all have an account manager aligned to you. We'll be more than happy to discuss this in more depth afterwards. We'll quickly look at implementation support because I think it's a key point here, and there are 2 flavors. So for anybody that buys 10 named users or less, or 1,500 transactions or less, will simply receive a welcome pack, which is an email to lots of links that talk to you about support, onboarding, resources, best practices, so on and so forth. But it's very much down to you to ensure that it's successful. If you if you procure 11 named users or more, or 1,501 transactions or more, you're assigned a customer success account manager, which is an individual person who is assigned to your organization. And their role is not just to make sure the person buying the licenses knows how to administer them, but also how department heads are comfortable utilizing the software, how their team can be trained. And there's multiple steps that they'll do to ensure success of your deployment. So again, if you're looking at 1,500 transactions, add the extra one just to get that additional support, because I do feel that it's very beneficial. So we'll summarize and then we'll have time for questions as well. But in summary, a digital signature solution will make your organization and your processes more efficient. They will make your organization more sustainable by a reduction in paper, print materials, transportation, etc. You have a better audit trail for compliance and for showing engagements with relevant stakeholders. You fundamentally are going to be delivering a better user experience for internal and external stakeholders. And the thing that really makes this a bit of a no-brainer for me is you should get a return on your investment. Whatever you spend on a digital signature solution you should see as a return through cost and time savings, as well as better end user experiences as well. That is pretty much everything for me at this stage. So we have time for questions. We've got a question from Noel. So can you swap named users during the period? No, you cannot, Noel. So a VIP agreement is to some extent inflexible from this perspective. So you can only have one type of Adobe license. And just to help, let me go back to my license slide. So you can only have either your VIP can either have a business or an enterprise agreement, and it can only be either named user or transaction. So if you had a named user enterprise license and you had another need for transactions, you couldn't swap it over. You'd have to create a new agreement to all of your transactions, or you'd have to wait to the end of the agreement before you can switch to an alternative licensing model. Hope that answers that question. Do we have any more questions on the floor? I think that looks like all. We'll hang on for another couple of moments. We'll put the exit video on as well. We will follow up with a recording for the slides. Yes, and just to share, we'll send over the slide deck. We'll send over the link to the Global Fund case study, and we'll also share that Forrester report, which we touched on today as well. But like I said, internally, we've got dedicated teams. We're all fully trained on the whole range of Adobe products, including Sign, and we have product champions who can also help. So yes, sorry, Noel. So I didn't quite answer your question correctly. So in terms of joiners, leavers, absolutely. So in the console, if you assigned yourself, Noel, as a licensee, or you assigned David Grant to access and be a named user, and David left, or for whatever reason you wanted to transfer that over, you have the ability to do so. Obviously, if I had 150 transactions and some had been used, then it may have eaten into that license quantity, but otherwise that's absolutely fine. We've got a question around integrations with other applications. So we can go, I'm conscious that it can be a bit of a rabbit hole when we start going into integrations, but as standard, Adobe will integrate with some basic Office applications. So Word, Outlook, for example. There are 70 off-the-shelf APIs, which include things such as Salesforce, Dynamics, more of the Microsoft suite, Workday, very commonly known applications that can, that are very heavily utilized. The integration, so there are APIs made available as well, and there are services available if you don't have in-house expertise. I do have some really useful documentation, and I think that might be like I said, it's quite a big conversation to potentially go into. So I'll share some information with you, and in fact with everybody specifically, that talks around a bit more around integrations, but more than happy to pick that up offline as well. It's in the chat. Oh, actually, Jeremy shared already in the chat pod the Global Fund case study. The Forrester report's also referenced in there, but again, we'll reiterate and follow up via email with more details. No problem. Do you have any more questions at this stage? Feel free to ask now. We'll hang on just a couple more minutes in case anything else comes through. But again, thank you everybody for taking time to join today's session. And we will follow up with you all accordingly. Sorry, Rachel, I've got a question from you as well, just in regards to when getting signatures, do you need to send it to people in an email? And no, you don't. It is Adobe Sign is a cloud-based solution. So there is no need to do anything with your email at all. So if you have even the basic business edition through Acrobat and Word, for example, there is a button already on those applications that will say send for signature. And again, it allows you to do things on mobile, and the ability to, well, the concept of it being cloud-based gives you far more flexibility to allow the cloud to do the work, to chase things up, as well as having access on mobile devices, for example. I hope that addresses your question.
Rachel was from Christchurch.
That's great, Rachel. If you need anything else, again, feel free to reach out, and we'll drop you some details after this as well.